Hi everyone, welcome to my channel Bibbity Bobbity Books. My name is Ellie and this is going to be my short horror books recommendations video. So before we jump into the video, I just want to take a quick moment to say thank you so much if you've recently subscribed to my channel. We've recently hit a big milestone. We've hit 2,000 subscribers, which just blows my mind. And I'm so grateful and thankful and just feel so lucky to have such a wonderful community here on this channel. It's been so nice getting to know you in the comment section. So just thank you so much if you watch my videos, if you interact with them. It honestly means the world. So yeah, thank you. And yeah, I thought this would be a fun video to film because we are now in September. Finally, we're in the bear months, my favourite time of the year. I just love autumn and I love all things spooky, so I thought this would be a really fun video to film. I also thought it might be useful for some people who might be wanting to try horror but they don't want to commit to a really big long chunky book, so this is going to be perfect for you because these are all short books. I think most of them are under 250 pages, so they're nice and quick, the kinds of books that you can snuggle up with and read all in one sitting if you want to, maybe in an evening, and just feel all the spooky vibes. So yeah, I'm very excited for this video. So let's jump in with the first book. So my first recommendation for you is Wilding Hall by Elizabeth Hand. This is a folk horror novella. It's very short and it's a lot of fun. I actually read this one for the first time this year and I fell in love with it. I really enjoyed it. This follows a English folk rock band in the 70s and they go on a creative retreat to this old English manor house called Wilding Hall, and while they're there writing their second album, strange things start to happen and one of the band members actually ends up going missing. And this is actually presented in interview format. So basically the different band members are being interviewed several years after the event. The missing band member was never found and is now presumed dead, so they're all being questioned about their time in the manor house and the events leading up to this disappearance. So it's really fun because you're trying to piece together the narrative, you're trying to piece together what happened, you're hearing different people's points of view and they don't always match up, so you're never quite sure what actually happened, and it's just a lot of fun. There's obviously that mystery at the heart of it. It has a really gorgeous atmosphere because it's set in the English countryside in this really creepy manor house, and there's definitely an element of unreliable narrator in here because obviously this is a folk rock band in the 70s and they partied hard, they did a lot of drugs and alcohol and things, so you're not quite sure whether to believe their accounts or not, and you just get to know each band member so intimately. They're so well written, the dialogue is so realistic, and it's the kind of book that made me want to Google this band afterwards to find out more about them, but it's not actually a real band, it's fiction, but they just felt so real to me. It honestly felt like a real band and I just love that. So yeah, I couldn't recommend this highly enough. I thoroughly enjoyed it. The next book I want to recommend to you is A House at the Bottom of a Lake by Josh Malerman. So this one I think would be a great transitional book because it actually takes place during the summer, so it has like warm summer aesthetics, but it also has that edge of something a little bit dark and a little bit creepy to it as well. So if you're in a place like me here in England where it's now autumn but it's still warm, like today is like 25 degrees and gorgeous and sunny, doesn't really feel like autumn, so you might want a book that kind of reflects that, and I think this one is going to be perfect for you. But yeah, this is quite a strange one. I would describe it as a quiet horror. It's not something that's going to, you know, really thrill you. There's no really big horrific scenes in here, but it's more just very unsettling and quite unusual, and I really enjoyed it because of that. So in this story we follow two teenagers who are falling in love for the first time. And on their first date they go kayaking or canoeing, I can't remember, but they go out on a lake and they discover this tunnel that takes you through to a secluded lake, a kind of hidden away place, and they go there on their first date and they realise that there is actually a house at the bottom of this lake, which just doesn't make any sense. And the two of them become really obsessed with this place, and they spend their whole summer getting to know each other, falling in love, but also becoming kind of obsessed with this house at the bottom of the lake, and they go down diving to explore it, and it just doesn't make sense. And it's so strange and so surreal, but just really creepy as well. There's something that's scary to me about large objects underwater, and just the fact that they're diving and they're going through these rooms and it's all a bit weird. And there's definitely links to kind of first love and obsession. It does also have a bit of an open ending, so that might be something that you like or something that you don't like, but I personally found this really captivating and I just thought it was such a unique story. Another book that might be quite good for this kind of transitional time would be Laure by Tim McGregor. So this is a book that is set in a Nordic fishing village. So it's set on the coast and it follows the perspective of a teenage boy called Casper, and it basically follows what happens to him and his family and his village when a lure maid shows up in their harbour. And this quickly descends into complete chaos. This was a wild ride. It's so atmospheric. The descriptions are really evocative. You can practically taste the salt in the air and smell the seaweed. So if you're looking for something that has that kind of ocean sea aesthetic, then I would highly recommend this book. And it has a lot of really interesting themes. This is set in quite an old-fashioned village, which has basically the women in this village are heavily oppressed, and you know the women are expected to be married off to whoever their father chooses for them, and are expected to devote their lives to serving their husbands, and they don't really have a choice in it. And so that is kind of a heavy theme within this book, as well as a coming of age story, as well as self-destruction and also revenge. I would say those are kind of the main themes within this story. But yeah, it's so good. It has a build up of tension throughout the book that escalates and escalates until you have this really explosive and violent ending. So if you're looking for a wild horror novella, nice and short but really packs a punch, then I would recommend this one. The next book that I want to recommend to you is, I think, the longest book on this recommendations list. So this one comes in at 266 pages, so it's just slightly over 250, but I really wanted to include it because this is one of my favourite ever horror books. I thoroughly enjoyed this one. If you enjoy things that are a little bit weird and a little bit fantastical, then I would recommend this book. This one follows a woman who was a very successful author in her time who went missing. She's called Cassandra, and the book opens with her family, I think it's her nephew and her niece, going to her house to sort through her affairs, and they discover this letter that's addressed to them, and it's from Cassandra, and Cassandra is basically saying that they are entitled to her fortune if they read this letter front to back and basically hear her story, because Cassandra is a woman who has been surrounded by a lot of controversy. She was in this really famous trial for the murder of her husband. She wasn't ever found to be guilty, but there was obviously a lot of publicity around all of that, and kind of horrifying things and disaster has kind of followed her throughout her whole life. And so this book is presented as that letter, and it's basically Cassandra telling us her point of view, and it's so fascinating. So basically we find out that Cassandra's truth is that for her whole life she has been followed by this fae creature. Now this book really reminded me of Pan's Labyrinth, so if you really enjoy that horror book, I would definitely recommend this one because it has similar vibes, it has a similar aesthetic, and it has that idea of a young girl who is able to see like a fae world that no one else can see, and that fae world isn't necessarily good, it's quite dark, and that is exactly the feeling of this book. And it's so fascinating because I feel like you can interpret this in different ways. So you can either read her story and believe her truth, which is that there is this fantastical world that exists and she has been acting in accordance with that, and because she is trying to protect those around her from these fae creatures and things. Or you can interpret it as her perhaps having a mental illness. I personally read it as, you know, she is a young girl who experienced a huge amount of trauma in her life, and I think this is her way of understanding what happened to her, because a lot of things happened to her when she was very young, things that she probably wouldn't be able to understand with a child's mind, and so she created this world to protect her and to help her understand what was happening to her. It's quite difficult to talk about this one without going into spoilers, but it honestly was fascinating. But please, please be warned of triggers in here, as with all of these books, because these are all horror books, so they all talk about disturbing and potentially triggering content. But this one in particular has big trigger warnings for child abuse and things like that, so please be careful before going into this one. But if you like things that are a bit weird, if you like things that have a bit of an open interpretation to them, if you like things that are a little bit fantastical, a bit fairy tale like, then I couldn't recommend this one highly enough. Next up we have Bloom by Delilah Dawson. This is a book that I read, I think this year as well, and it was so fun. This is actually a horror novella that has a cottagecore aesthetic, and that is something that I just didn't think would ever work, because cottagecore is obviously very cozy, very comforting, and you tend to associate it with those kinds of stories, whereas this is not a cozy story, it is a horror, and it gets pretty intense and wild. But it just somehow really worked, and I really ended up enjoying this book. I found it a very addictive read and very fast paced. I think this story is one of those that's best to go in without knowing too much, because I think you can be easily spoiled for what's going to happen in the direction that this is going to go in. So I'm going to just give you a very brief idea of what it's about. So basically we follow a woman called Rosemary who ends up meeting another woman called Ash at a farmer's market, and Ash runs her own stall where she sells her homemade soaps and her homemade cakes and things like that, and the two of them strike up a friendship, they get to know each other, and that blossoms into a romance. But there's always an edge of something not being quite right, and that is all I'm going to say about this book, but it was wild and I really enjoyed it. The next book that I want to recommend to you is a classic, and that is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. This is another one of my favourites, and I just think this is so good, and it's not very long either. I think this one is less than 250 pages. Yeah, 245 pages, so it's nice and short, but it is so immersive. I really enjoyed this one, but I do want to set expectations, because this is another horror book that isn't loud, it isn't really gory, it doesn't have those really big horror scenes in it. I would describe it more as a terror book, if that makes sense. Terror rather than horror, maybe, because this one is much more about a build-up of tension. It's quite slow paced and it's quite uncomfortable, but it's not necessarily big jump scares and things like that. Don't get me wrong, there are some scenes in here that are very creepy that have stuck with me for a long time, but it's more just very gets under your skin, makes you feel uncomfortable and tense and on edge the whole time, and I really loved it for that. I thought it was so atmospheric. But what is this book actually about? So this book I'm sure you've probably heard of before because it's quite famous, but it follows a group of people who move in to Hill House because Hill House is rumoured to be haunted, and they are trying to find tangible evidence of a haunting. So they're trying to prove that the haunting is real. And I feel like that's all you really need to know going in. But the main thing that I loved about this story was the perspective that we follow, because we follow a woman called Eleanor, and she is fascinating to be inside the head of. She's not necessarily a likable character, but she's so interesting, and you quickly find out that she is particularly susceptible to whatever is going on within Hill House, and we watch her as she slowly descends into paranoia and into madness, and she has a lot of inner turmoil, and she's dealing with a lot of guilt from her past. And it's just so interesting seeing things through her eyes. Oh no, the camera battery died. I'm really sorry. I had to just go and switch it out. So apologies if the angle has shifted slightly or if the lighting's a bit different. But I think I was just in the middle of rambling on to you about The Haunting of Hill House and how much I enjoy it, particularly the main protagonist, especially because she has a lot of inner turmoil and a lot of things are going on in her head that we're of course privy to as the reader, but the other characters don't know what's going on beneath the surface, so they kind of dismiss her as just being a little bit weird, a little bit quiet, and they have no idea what's really going on behind the scenes, as it were. So it just makes for a very interesting dynamic to read about, and it's so unsettling and so creepy. So yeah, highly recommend this to you if you haven't read it already, and if you're looking for something with a little bit of tension that's not too scary. My next recommendation for you is Woman in Black by Susan Hill. This is for you if you're looking for a classic gothic ghosty story, because in my opinion it doesn't get much better than this one, and it's so nice and short as well. It comes in at 138 pages, so it's a nice quick read, perfect for you if you just want to cozy up in the evening and just devour a creepy ghosty story. So yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed this one when I read it. You've probably heard of it before because it's been adapted a few times. We've got the film with Daniel Radcliffe in it, but we've also got the play. It was adapted into a theatre play, which is also very good. I've seen that as well, and it is actually really scary. So yeah, it's been adapted a few times, so I feel like it's quite a well-known story, but if you haven't heard of it before, it's a story that follows our main protagonist, Arthur Kipp, who is a solicitor, and he is sent from London to this remote town to attend the funeral and to sort out the affairs of Mrs. Alice Drablow of Eel Marsh House. And Eel Marsh House is of course set on the English moors, the misty moors, and it's positioned at the end of this causeway which can become flooded, which leads to our main character being trapped in the house at certain times, which is very scary. It's very isolated, and we basically follow our main character as he is going through this woman's affairs, and he is starting to learn about some superstitions that are within the village. The villagers have a lot of fear about this woman in black, who is this figure that people have seen, and they think that she is a bringer of bad tidings, that if you see her then, you know, disastrous things will occur. So there's a lot of fear around this woman in black, and it's just so creepy and atmospheric. If you want that haunted house setting, then look no further than this book, and I just had a really fun time with this one. I've also heard that it is a really good audiobook as well. I think there's an adaptation for audio where it's acted with sound effects and things, so if you're looking for a good audiobook then you might want to check that one out as well. And then my last recommendation for you is a good one, and that is The Heart by David Sodergren. I really enjoyed this one. It's another one of my favourite horror books. It's a folk horror, and it follows an old woman called Muriel who has lived in this remote Scottish fishing village for her entire life, but her village is being threatened by this property developer who is basically wanting to evacuate all of the people who live there so that they can build this big complex. I think it's like a golfing resort or something that they want to build there. And most of the villagers have left, but Muriel and a few others are standing their ground, and they're trying to, you know, fight for their village to remain as it is. And it seems like a bit of a lost cause until this mysterious fog comes in from the sea. It rolls in, and it's known as the Har, and it brings with it this creature that may just be the key to Muriel's redemption. And it's so much fun. It's a fantastic gore-soaked monster horror with a sort of folklore element to it as well. A fantastic setting with the mist rolling in off the sea, this kind of cold, harsh environment of the Scottish fishing village, and such a fantastic protagonist as well. Muriel is so fun to follow. You can't help but root for her despite the fact that she has questionable morals, and it also just explores lots of really interesting themes as well, of loneliness, of grief, of aging, of accepting change, and it's just such a great read. So if you're looking for something a little bit gory, and if you're a fan of sort of monstery type horrors and you want something with a really great setting and a fun protagonist who's a little bit different, then look no further than The Ha. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Okay, so that brings me to the end of this video. I really hope that you've enjoyed it. I hope that you found some recommendations here. Please let me know if you've read any of these books before, because I'd love to have a chat with you in the comment section down below. Or if you have any other recommendations for short horror books, please do drop them in the comment section so that everyone can find more recommendations if they want. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a fantastic day, whatever it is you are doing, wherever you are, and I'm wishing you all the best. Don't forget to like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see some more from me, and I guess I'll see you next time with another video. Bye!